Isabel Allende, House of the Spirits, Part 15. Esteban stopped going to the country and put Pedro Segunda Garcia in charge of everything, including his imported cows. He stopped going out with his friends, stopped going to the golf course, stopped working, so as to watch his sister day and night and block her path every time she tried to get near Clara. The atmosphere of the house became dense, dark, and unbreathable. Even Nana walked around like someone haunted. The only one who could continue completely unaffected was Clara, who in her distraction and innocence had no idea what was going on. Esteban and Ferrola's hatred for each other took a long time to explode. It began with a concealed uneasiness and a desire to offend each other in small details, but it grew until it filled the house. That summer, Esteban had to go to Tres Marias because exactly at harvest time, Pedro Segunda Garcia fell off a horse and ended up in the hospital with a cracked skull. As soon as the foreman had recovered, Esteban returned to the city without telling anyone. On the train, he felt a terrible foreboding and an unspoken desire that something dramatic should take place, but he did not know that the drama had already begun when he desired it. He arrived back in the city in the middle of the afternoon, but went directly to his club, where he played a few hands of poker and dined without successfully quelling his anxiety and impatience. During dinner, there was a slight earthquake. The crystal chandeliers swayed with their usual tinkling, but no one so much as looked up. Everyone continued eating, and the musicians continued playing without missing a single note, but Esteban Trueba jumped up as if he were an omen. He finished his meal in a hurry and asked for his check and left. Ferrula, who usually had her nerves well under control, had never got used to earthquakes. She had conquered the fear of the ghosts Clara would invoke and the mice in the countryside, but earthquakes shook her to her bones, and long after they had passed, she was still trembling. That night she had not yet gone to bed, and she came running to Clara's room. Clara had drunk her evening tea and was sleeping peacefully. In search of a little company and warmth, Ferrula climbed into bed beside her, careful not to wake her up and whispering silent prayers so that the tremors would not become a full-blown quake. Esteban Trueba found her there. He entered the house as silently as a thief, went up to Clara's room without turning on the lights, and appeared like a tornado before the two sleeping women, who thought he was in Tres Marias. He leaned over his sister with the same rage he would have felt if she were his wife's seducer. He pulled her from the bed, dragged her down the hall, pushed her down the stairs, and thrust her into the library, while Clara shouted from her bedroom doorway, not understanding what was going on. Along with Ferrula, Esteban vented all his fury as an unhappy husband, shouting things at her he should never have said, calling her everything from a dyke to a whore, and accusing her of perverting his wife with her spinster caresses, and driving her crazy, distracted, mute, and spiritualist with her arsenal of lesbian arts. He accused her of taking her pleasure with Clara while he was away, and of besmirching the names of the children, the honor of the house, and the memory of their dear departed mother, and told her he was sick and tired of her evil tricks and that he was throwing her out of the house. She should have immediately, and he never wanted to set eyes on her again. She should leave immediately, and he never wanted to set eyes on her again. He forbade her to come near his wife and children, and promised that she would never want for money as long as she lived. He would see to it that she had enough to live on decently, and he had once promised her, but that if he ever caught her prowling around his family, he would kill her on the spot, and she should get that through her head. I swear to you in the name of our mother that I'll kill you. I set my curse on you, Esteban, Ferula shouted back. You will always be alone. Your body and soul will shrivel up, and you'll die like a dog. And she left the big house on the corner forever, dressed only in her nightgown, taking nothing with her. The next day, Esteban Trueba went to see Father Antonio and told him what had happened, without going into detail. The priest listened passively, with the bland expression of one who has heard it all before. What do you want from me, my son? He asked when Esteban had finished speaking. That once a month you make sure my sister receives a certain envelope I'm going to deliver to you. I don't want her to have any financial worries. And I must explain that I'm not doing this out of the kindness, but because of a promise. Father Antonio took the first envelope with a sigh and sketched the sign of benediction with his hands, but Esteban had already turned to leave. He gave Clara no explanation of what had come between his sister and himself. He told her he had thrown her out of the house, and that he strictly forbade her to mention his sister's name in his presence, suggesting that if she had a shred of decency, she would refrain from mentioning it behind his back. He had all Farilla's clothing and any objects that might serve as a reminder of her removed from the house, and resolved that as far as he was concerned, his sister was dead. Clara understood that there was no point in asking any questions. She went to the sewing room to look for her pendulum. Then she spread a map of the city on the floor and held the pendulum 1.5 feet above it, waiting for the oscillations to tell her sister-in-law's address. But after trying all afternoon, she realized that the system would not work unless Ferula had a fixed address. The pendulum having failed, she went out to look for her by carriage, hoping that her instinct would guide her in her search, but that method also was unsuccessful. She consulted her 3-legged table, but no spiritual guide showed up to lead her through the city to Ferula. She called her with her mind and consulted her tarot cards, but to no avail. Finally, she decided to resort to more traditional techniques. She began to look for her through friends and by asking the various delivery men who came to the house and might have come across her, but no one had seen a trace of her. Eventually, her investigation led her to Father Antonio's door. Don't look for her, the priest told her. Don't look for her, the priest told her. She doesn't want to see you. Clara realized that was why none of her infallible methods of divining had worked. The Mora sisters were right, she said to herself. Can't find someone who doesn't want to be found. Esteban Trueba entered a very prosperous period. His business deals seemed to have been touched by a magic wand. He felt pleased with life, and he was rich, just as he had once set out to be. He had acquired the concessions for other mines, was exporting fruit to foreign countries, had founded a construction firm, and Tres Marias, which had greatly expanded, was now the best hacienda in the area. He had been untouched by the economic crisis that convulsed the rest of the country. In the northern provinces, the collapse of the nitrate fields had left thousands of workers destitute. Hungry tribes of unemployed workers and their families, women, children, and old people, had taken to the roads in search of work. As they approached the capital, were slowly forming a belt of misery around it. They settled in any way they could, under planks of wood and pieces of cardboard, in the midst of garbage and despair. They wandered the streets, begging for a chance to work, but there were no jobs, and slowly but surely the rugged workers, thin with hunger, shrunken with cold, ragged and desolate, stopped asking for work and asked for alms instead. The city filled with beggars, and then with thieves. Neither had there been such terrible frosts as there were that year. There was snow in the capital city, an unaccustomed spectacle that remained on the front page of the newspapers, touted as a festive decoration, while in the impoverished shanty towns on the city's outskirts, the blue, frozen bodies of small children were discovered every morning. There was not enough charity for so many poor, defenseless people. That was the year of exanthematic typhus. It began like any other calamity that strikes the poor, but quickly took on the characteristics of a divine punishment. It was born in the poorest quarters of the city because of the harsh winter, the malnutrition, and the dirty water, and it joined forces with the unemployed and spread in every direction. The hospitals could not cope. The city wandered through the streets with missing eyes, picking the lice from their hair and throwing them at the healthy. The plague spread to every house, infecting schools and factories, so that no one felt secure. Everyone lived in fear, inspecting themselves for the first sign of the dread disease. Those who caught it began to shake with an icy cold that lodged in their bones and gradually fell prey to a deep lethargy. They were left gazing like madmen to be eaten alive by their own fever, filling with sores, shooting blood, hallucinating scenes of fire and drowning, falling in the ground with bones like wool, legs like rags, and a taste of bile in their mouths. Those bodies became raw meat, with a red pustule next to each blue one, next to a yellow one, next to a black one, as they vomited up their own intestines and cried out God for mercy, begging him to let them die, for they could not go on. Their heads were bursting, and their souls escaping in a blur of shit and fear. Esteban proposed to take his whole family to the countryside to protect them from infection, but Clara would not hear of it. She was busy tending to the poor in a task that had neither beginning nor end. She left the house early in the morning and at times returned close to midnight. She emptied the wardrobes of the house, taking the children's clothes, the blankets from the beds, her husband's jackets. She packed up food from the pantry and established a shipping system with Pedro Segunda Garcia, who sent cheese, eggs, smoked meat, fruit, and chicken from Tres Marias for her to distribute amongst the poor. She lost weight and looked emaciated. She began to walk in her sleep again. Farula's absence was a cataclysm in the house. Even Nana, who had always wished for this moment, was upset. When spring came and Clara was able to get some rest, her tendency to escape reality and lose herself in daydreams became more pronounced. Even though she could no longer rely on her sister-in-law's impeccable skills for ordering the chaos of the big house on the corner, she still paid no attention to domestic matters. She left everything in the hands of Nana and the other servant and immersed herself in the world of apparitions and psychic experiments. Her notebooks that bore witness to life grew confused, and her calligraphy lost its convent elegance, degenerating into a series of mangled scribbles that were sometimes so tiny that they were impossible to read and sometimes so large that 3 words would fill a page. In the years that followed, a group of Gurdjieff students, Rosicrucians, spiritualists, and sleepless bohemians gathered around Clara and the 3 Moorish sisters. They ate 3 meals a day in the house and spent their time alternating between urgent consultations with the spirits of the 3-legged table and reading the verses of the latest mystic poet to land in Clara's lap. Esteban allowed this invasion of grotesqueries because he had long ago realized that it was pointless to interfere in his wife's life, but he was determined that at last his sons would be kept at safe distance with her magic, so Jamie and Nicholas were sent to a Victorian English boarding school where any excuse sufficed for pulling down a student's pants and caning his buttocks. This happened especially to Jamie, who made fun of the British royal family and at the age of 12 displayed an interest in reading Marx, a Jew who was spreading revolution around the world. Nicholas inherited the adventurous spirit of his great uncle Marcos and his mother's propensity for making up astrological charts and reading the future, but this did not constitute a major crime in the rigid code of the school, only an eccentricity, so he fared far better there than his brother. Blanca's case was a different matter, because her father did not interfere with her education. He believed that her destiny was marriage and a brilliant life in society, where the ability to converse with the dead, if kept on a frivolous level, could be an asset. He maintained that magic, like cooking and religion, was a particularly feminine affair. For this reason, perhaps he was able to feel a certain sympathy for the three Moira sisters, while he despised male spiritualists almost as much as he did priests. As for Clara, she went everywhere with her daughter hanging from her skirts. She included her in her Friday sessions and raised her in the greatest intimacy with spirits, with the members of secret societies and with the impoverished artists whose patronesses she was, just as she had gone with her mother in the days when she was mute. She now took Blanca with her on her visits to the poor, weighed down with gifts and comfort. This is to assuage our conscience, darling, she would explain to Blanca, but it doesn't help the poor. They don't need charity, they need justice. This was the point on which she had her worst arguments with Esteban, who was of a different opinion on the subject. Justice, is it just for everyone to have the same amount? The lazy and the same as those who work, the foolish the same as the intelligent? Even animals don't live like that. It's not a matter of rich and poor, it's a matter of strong and weak. I agree that we should have all the same opportunities, but these people don't even try. It's very easy to stretch out your hand and beg for alms, but I believe in effort and reward. Thanks to that, I've been able to achieve what I've achieved. I've never asked anybody for a favor, and I've never been dishonest, which goes to prove that anyone can do it. I was destined to be poor, unhappy notary assistant. That's why I have these Bolshevik ideas brought into my house. Go do your charitable work in the slums for all I care. It's all well and good for building the character of young ladies, but don't start coming in here with the same half-cocked ideas as Pedro Tercero Garcia, because I won't stand for it. It was true that Pedro Tercero Garcia was talking about justice in Tres Marias. He was the only one who dared to speak back to the patron, despite the beatings his father gave him every time he caught him in the act. Since he was a child, the boy had been making surreptitious journeys into town to borrow books, read the newspaper, converse with the local school teacher, a fervent communist who years later would be shot dead by a bullet between the eyes. He also stole away at night to the bar in San Lucas, where he met with a certain union leaders who had a passion for fixing the world's troubles between sips of beer, or with the huge, magnificent Father Jose Dulce Maria, a Spanish priest with a full head of revolutionary ideas that had earned him the honor of being relegated by the Society of Jesus to that hidden corner of the world, although that didn't keep him from transforming biblical parables into socialist propaganda. The day Esteban Torrebra discovered that the son of his administrator was slipping subversive pamphlets to his tenants, he summoned him to his office and, in the presence of his father, gave him a lashing with a snakeskin whip. "This is the first warning, you insolent little shit," he said without raising his voice and staring at him with fire in his eyes. "But the next time I catch you bothering people, I'm going to lock you up. I don't want rebels in my land, you hear? Because I'm the one in charge here, and I have the right to surround myself with people I like. And I don't like you, and now you know. I put up with you because of your father, who served me faithfully all these years. But you'd better watch out, because things could get bad for you. Now get out of here." Pedro Cerro Garcia closely resembled his father. He was dark-skinned and had the same hard features that looked as if they had been sculpted in stone, the same big sad eyes and the same dark stiff hair that stood up like a brush. He had only two loves, his father and the patron's daughter, whom he had loved from the day they slept together naked beneath the dining room table back in his early childhood. Nor had Blanca escaped the same fate. Every time she went on vacation on the country and arrived at Tres Marias in the whirl of dust that always preceded the coaches piled high with their chaotic baggage, her heart would pound with impatience and longing like an African drum. She was always the first to jump down from the carriage and run toward the house, and she always found Pedro Tercero Garcia in the place where they had seen each other for the first time, standing barefoot in the doorway, half hidden by the shadow of the door, timid and sullen in his worn pants, his old man's eyes scanning the horizon, and as he awaited her arrival. The two ran to each other, hugging, kissing, laughing, and affectionately punching each other and rolling on the ground as they pulled each other's hair and shouted with joy. "That's enough, young lady. Let go of that raggedy child," Nana would shriek, trying to pull them apart. "Let them be, Nana," Clara would say, for she knew better. "They're only children, and they like each other." The children ran off to hide and tell each other everything they had stored up during the long months of separation. Pedro blushingly handed her some whittled animals he had made for her, and Blanca gave him the gifts she had brought for him: a penknife that opened like a flower, a tiny magnet that magically picked up rusty nails from the ground. The summer she arrived with half the contents of the trunk of magic books that had belonged to Uncle Marcos. She was nearly 10 years old. Pedro Tercero still had some trouble reading, but his curiosity and desire accomplished what his school mistress had been unable to do with all her cannings. They spent that summer reading among the rushes by the river, the pine trees in the forest, and the sprouting stalks of the wheat fields, discussing the virtues of Sinbad and Robin Hood. Had bad luck of the black pirate, the true and edifying stories from the treasury of youth, the worst meanings of the words that did not appear in the dictionary of the Spanish Royal Academy, the cardiovascular system in illustrated plates where you could see a man with no skin and all his veins and arteries exposed for all to see, but wearing underpants. Within a few weeks, the boy had learned to read voraciously. They entered the wide, deep world of impossible stories, gnomes, fairies, men standing on islands who eat their comrades after casting their fate at dice, tigers who let themselves be tamed for love, fascinating inventions, geographical and zoological curiosities, oriental countries with genies in bottles, dragons in caves, and princesses held prisoner in towers. They often went to see old Pedro Garcia, whose senses had been worn away by time. He had gradually grown blind, his eyes slowly filled with a sky blue film, of which he said, "These clouds are taking over my sight." He was grateful for the visits from Blanca and Pedro, who was his grandson, although he had already forgotten that fact. He listened to the stories they had chosen from the magic books, which they had to shout into his ear, because also he said that the wind was invading his ears and making him deaf. In return, he showed them how to protect themselves from the stings of poisonous insects and demonstrated the effectiveness of his anecdote by placing a live Scorpio on his arm. He taught them how to search for water. You have to hold a dry stick in your hands and walk tapping the ground in silence, thinking only of water and the thirst of the stick, until suddenly, sensing the presence of moisture, the stick began to tremble. "That's where you have to dig," the old man said, but he explained that this was not the system he had used for digging wells around Tres Marias because he needed no stick. His bones were so thirsty that whenever he walked on top of underground water, no matter how far down, his old skeleton told him where it was. He taught them about how the different grasses and herbs that grew in the fields, and made them smell them and taste them, even caress them, until they were able to identify them one by one according to their healing properties. This one to calm the mind, this one to rid of diabolic influence, this one to make the eyes shine, that one to strengthen the stomach, this to stimulate the flow of blood.